Last year in fantasy football, there were a ton of high priced fantasy running backs that did not return their value on investment. Today, I am going to go over 5 running backs that I am fading at their current ADP cost on First Read Fantasy. So the first player we're going to talk about today is going to be running back Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. Taylor is going as RB8, ADP of 19. So he's going in the mid to high second round in fantasy football drafts. I am avoiding Jonathan Taylor. This Colts offense is very confusing, right? You have Anthony Richardson, who in the beginning of the offseason, there were talks about him possibly being shut down with the shoulder injury. Things weren't right. Now he's back on the field practicing for training camp. Is it going to be Richardson? Is it going to be Daniel Jones? If it's Daniel Jones, I would actually feel more confident that the running or at least the offense would be a little bit more balanced, which would help out Jonathan Taylor, in my opinion, get some less stacked boxes. And if you want Jonathan Taylor to return on his investment, you're likely looking at a guy that you need to have around 1,400 rushing yards and 10 to 11 total touchdowns to hit inside that top 5 for running backs. I don't necessarily know if that's in the cards for Jonathan Taylor because of how the offense is set up, right? With the quarterback position being so middle, I mean, not even middle of the pack, just downright bad. And if Anthony Richardson does not continue to make strides forward, it's not going to get much better. Again, I'd feel better with Daniel Jones, but let's break down the numbers for Jonathan Taylor last season that make me so hesitant from drafting him this year. When you look at Jonathan Taylor from weeks 1 to 14, just before the fantasy football playoffs, Jonathan Taylor was RB 28 in total fantasy points and RB 19 in points per game. Now, why is that important? Because a lot of fantasy managers drafted Jonathan Taylor at the 1-2 turn last year, and he burned them so bad that probably a decent amount of owners, unless they hit on later picks, did not make the playoffs, right? And Jonathan Taylor was phenomenal in the fantasy playoffs, right? This is a guy who was number 2 in points per game and number 2 in total fantasy points in the entire fantasy playoffs for that 3-week stretch. And I'm not going to sit here and say there was nobody in the playoffs that had Jonathan Taylor, but a lot of fantasy managers probably didn't reap the rewards for his fantasy playoff success. He did finish the season as RB12 in total points, but it is, again, a little bit misleading because for a large majority of the season, right, he was outside the top 20 in total fantasy points and just around 20 in points per game. And when I look at Jonathan Taylor, ranked 38th in terms of total targets last season with 31, and that's despite him being inside the top 20, ranking 17th in total routes run at the running back position. So this is a guy who relies heavily on touchdowns and rushing yards, and he's not going to get much work in the receiving game. And so with the fact that defenses likely will stack the box against this offense, I just prefer other guys in this range. If Taylor was a guy that could, that provided more in the receiving game, I'd feel a little bit more confident. But this offense needs to be pretty solid to average for Taylor to, I think, hit those numbers of, again, 10, 11 total touchdowns and somewhere around 1,400 rushing yards because of the lack of production on the receiving end. Let's move on to the next player here. It's going to be James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. James Cook is probably one of my bigger fades at ADP this year. ADP is 33. He's going as RB 14. And looking at James Cook, this is a guy who, he has reported to training camp. He was a full participant on day 1, which is really good news, right? We're not getting a hold in or a holdout. He's going to participate, which should make you feel a little bit better if you are drafting James Cook. But for me, it's not really so much about the hold in or the holdout that has me hesitant on drafting James Cook. When I look at his numbers last year, James Cook had a career high of 18 total touchdowns. And despite having a career high of 18 total touchdowns, he finished outside of the top 10 on a points per game basis at the running back position with 16.7, finishing 11th in points per game at the running back position. It's concerning to me that he did not finish higher with those touchdown marks. When you look at the running backs who, finished inside the top 5 for touchdowns on the year, all of them finished inside the top 10 in total fantasy points per game. You had Jameer Gibbs, right, who led the league in total touchdowns at the running back position. He finished second in points per game. You had Derrick Henry, who was up there, who finished fourth in points per game. You had Kyron Williams, who was up there, who finished 10th in points per game. And then you had Barkley, Bijan, and Jacobs all tied for fifth in total touchdowns last year at the running back position. Barkley finished second in points per game. Bijan finished third in points per game. Jacobs finished eighth in points per game. So it is a little bit concerning if there is touchdown regression, which there will be. James Cook is not running for another 18 total touchdowns. It is concerning to me. I like that he didn't have higher numbers with all of that success when it came to touchdowns. I mean, over 50% of James Cook's total fantasy points last year came from scoring touchdowns, right? Like that is not sustainable for fantasy success. And so again, extremely efficient, right? With the touches to score in the end zone. I think he's going to score touchdowns again this year, but opportunity share wise, this isn't a guy that's getting a very large opportunity share, right? 25th in the NFL with 58% of the snaps last season. And Ty Johnson is back. Ty Johnson is a very, very good third down running back. Josh Allen made it known his feelings about Ty Johnson, and he said Ty Johnson is one of the best third down, if not, I think he might even said the best third down running back in the NFL. And so Ty Johnson's back, and I think that's going to limit the amount of work that James Cook's going to get in the passing game. You also couple that with Ray Davis, who had a pretty impressive year last year for a guy that was not really, in a full-time role. I think Ray Davis is going to be involved in this offense as well. And I just prefer other guys going around James Cook. So he's a guy that I'm fading. I'm passing on at his current cost. I'm going to be looking elsewhere at either the running back position in that range or just other positions in general. The next player that we're going to talk about today is going to be Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, RB18, ADP is 47th off the board. And Joe Mixon is starting the training camp or off season, or I guess starting the season technically, right, on the non football related injury list. He hurt his ankle this off season, and I believe he was working out. And this is the same ankle that he hurt last year. He missed some time last year and didn't really come back as the same player. It felt like, ever since he got hurt. And this is a guy who's 28 years old. He's going to be 29 by the time the season is over. And the offensive line in Houston is brutal, man. I mean, it is absolutely terrible. They did, draft, I believe, a tackle in the second round, but they didn't really make any big acquisitions. I have some concerns about that offensive line again. And right. Last year, Joe Mixon, 63% when it came to snap share, which was good enough for 14th in the NFL. It's a pretty solid snap share. But this team also brought in Nick Chubb, who I don't think Nick Chubb would have signed in Houston if he did not either get some sort of promised role, right? I'm not saying that they promised him that he'd be the starter or he'd get a complete 50-50 split, but I don't think Nick Chubb at this point in his career, coming off of the injuries, he could have went to like a team like the Bears or the Cowboys where maybe those rooms were a little bit more open. He chose to go to Houston, and I think it was a culture thing. I think they sold him on something, and I think it had to do with the fact that it's a team that's going to compete for the playoffs. And I also think that they had concerns about Mixon, and I think they told him, look, if you're healthy, you're going to get the football. Then Couple that with the fact that this Texans team last year was 22nd in plays per game. So this is not a very fast-paced offense. It's a really good defense, and an offense that likes to control the football and the clock. They're not fast-paced at all. I think his role might shrink with Nick Chubb, and you also have Woody Marks, who they brought in and drafted as well. Joe Mixon last year, second highest goal line carries in 2024 with 87.5%. I just think Nick Chubb is going to eat into those goal line carries. I mean, Nick Chubb is a guy that I could see getting into the end zone where you're watching Houston Texans games. You started Joe Mixon. They score a touchdown on the ground, and you look up, and it's Nick Chubb getting up from out of the pile, right? I think it's going to happen a decent amount this year, and maybe he got promised the goal line back role. And Joe Mixon is a good goal line back, so I'm not sitting here saying he's not, but Chubb can do that as well. And then the last thing on Joe Mixon, Houston Texans running back per Fantasy Pros have the fourth hardest schedule for the running back position. Now, we can't completely predict how much better defenses are going to be or how much worse. You do your best to project it. Defenses are kind of like relievers in baseball, I always say, where it's very volatile year over year. Where offenses are not like that because you have the same quarterback who controls a lot more. With defense, it's 11 guys trying to work together. Not to say offense isn't like that as well. I don't want to go on a rant here. The point is, fourth hardest schedule at the running back position. That has me concerned as well. Let's move on to our fourth guy. It's going to be Isiah Pacheco. Isiah Pacheco, running back 26, an ADP of 68. So not an insanely high cost, but a pretty decent penny. And when you consider some of the guys that go around Isiah Pacheco, right now, Chiefs offense, they lacked explosion last year, right? And so when you look at Isiah Pacheco, he was 73rd in breakaway runs last year. Before the injury in 2023, he was 11th in breakaway runs, right? So we saw a completely different player in 2024 compared to 2023. He had just 12 catches in 7 games last year. He was averaging 1.7 catches per game. 44 receptions in 2023 to me felt like more of an outlier, right? I don't expect him to get to 44 receptions again in his career. I just don't see it. It's just not his skill set, in my opinion. And this team also brought in Brashard Smith, who has already started to impress in camp so far for the Chiefs. It is early, but Brashard Smith, a converted wide receiver who I think could play in that Jerick McKinnon role. And they also brought in Elijah Mitchell, who I think can be an early down back as well. And Kareem Hunt is back. He's going to be a thorn in the side. This looks like a very messy running back room. It looks like it's going to be, a pretty solid rotation. I think Pacheco is going to get a decent amount of work. But I would say I wouldn't surprise me if Pacheco's on a short leash if he cannot bounce back, because last year he was not the same player. It did look like Pacheco did come back from injury maybe a little too soon, and more props to him for doing that, but that doesn't lead to fantasy success, right? And while it's impressive that he did that, and I salute him for trying to help his team, it did not lead to fantasy success last year. The last thing about Isiah Pacheco, he was he was 29th in routes run, right? I mean, so I just, not a player for me that I am targeting. And sorry, he was actually 29th in routes run the year before. But either way, I'm not targeting Isiah Pacheco. He's a guy I am going to pass on. Last guy, Kenneth Walker. Look, Kenneth Walker is a very, very good football player when he's on the field. Kenneth Walker, ADP 42, running back 15. Let's talk about Kenneth Walker, guys. I mean, he has never played a season fully healthy so far in his career. 2022, he had a hernia, missed 1 game. In 2022, he had an ankle, missed 1 game. 2023, he had left oblique, missed 2 games. 2024, had a right oblique, missed 2 games. 2024, had a high ankle, missed 2 games. And now he's got the ankle injury in OTAs. He's missed a total of 10 games due to injuries in the last 3 years. And there's concern already for me. The fact that he's already popping up on the injury report, I'm sure he's going to be okay to get through training camp, but the fact that it's already popping up, it's almost like PTSD with Kenneth Walker. This is a guy who I expect Kenneth Walker to be top 15, in points per game if he's on the field. But it's just a matter of how many games he's going to play. And Zach Charbonnet, I think it's notable. I mean, Zach Charbonnet, I think is a pretty solid player. I don't think he's the player that a lot of people hyped him up to be coming out, but I do think he's a solid player. And I don't know. When you look at Charbonnet was 32nd in opportunity share versus Walker, who was 12th. And despite that, Walker had just 4 more receptions than Charbonnet. And Charbonnet ran the second most routes in the NFL last year, which is extremely, extremely impressive for a guy that was in a committee. Last thing I'll say, guys that go around Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, Omar and Hampton, Najee Harris, this whole eye situation, it could open the floodgates where Hampton's not going to be in nearly the committee that we expected him to be in early on. I don't want to overreact too much, but there's already murkiness to Hampton's running mate where Charbonnet's healthy and Walker's already popped up with an injury at some point in the offseason. You also have Rashi Rice, who goes right next to Kenneth Walker after this whole suspension news has popped up. Rice is dropped, and his price is a guy that I can't ignore, and I would love to take him over Kenneth Walker. So those are just some guys I prefer right now in fantasy football over Kenneth Walker. But that's gonna do it for me, guys. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. I'm gonna be dropping more content, so keep your eyes on the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.